guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a special guest, Sunita Selvaraj. She is speaking to us from Malaysia, from Kuala Lumpur. And we're going to talk about Eastern religions and how they not only have influenced culture in the West, but also the church, the Christian church. So Sunita has a graduate degrees in theology, political science, and English literature from universities in Malaysia, Canada, and the UK. She has been a career academic for more than 25 years, teaching undergraduates subjects such as world religions, philosophy, and American government and politics. So I'm happy to have Sunita on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Becket. It's such a privilege and a blessing to be on the Becket Cook show.
Oh, I'm happy you're here. I'm very honored that you're here. Now, what time is it in Kuala Lumpur right now?
It is 7:05 a.m.
A.m. Okay.
A.m. Yes.
It's 4 p.m. in Los Angeles.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so or 4:05 p.m.
Hang on, Becket. I need to tell your audience something.
Yes.
So your audience doesn't know that Becket has an additional, how do I say this, skill and talent on his resume, which is he has actually come as a guest lecturer to my philosophy class. Right, Becket?
That's true. That's true.
Yes.
I have.
Yes.
Not in person, but over Zoom.
Not in person, virtually, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
The flight to Malaysia is like 50 hours, so it's too far.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I want to talk about how Eastern religions influence not only our culture in the West, but also Christianity. So first, let's start off with what are the major religions? What are the major Eastern religions?
Yeah. So
and which ones come from India and which come from China? Okay.
So India is we can say the cradle of many of the world's religions. And again, a fun fact for our viewers, the audience, is that every major religion that is being practiced today comes from the East, quote unquote. So we just have to, figure out which East is it? Is it East Asia, the South Asia, or the Middle East? So every major religion. Only kind of like the cults come from the States. So this is this is
Yes.
So if you think about it, right, Jehovah's Witnesses, the
Scientology
Mormons,
comes from Hollywood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, your neighbor, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, American exceptionalism, right, Becket?
Yes, exactly.
So that's fine. I'm just like, yeah.
So go ahead. What are the major Indian religions?
Major Indian religions. The big one is Hinduism, which I'm sure everyone has heard of. Out of Hinduism comes like three major. So out meaning they're actually rebelling against Hinduism. So we have Jainism, we have Buddhism. So Jainism actually comes first, and then we have Buddhism, and then much later on, we have Sikhism. So Sikhism, right? So these are the big ones out of India. And then China basically has two major religions, which is Taoism and Confucianism. So in India, the common misconception is that all these religions are the same, that people basically are doing the same thing. But that's not necessarily true, because if we look at the origins of especially Buddhism and Jainism, they are actually a reaction against Hinduism. So they don't want the caste system. In fact, what's shocking is that they didn't even believe in gods. So they would say, we don't need the gods. So they're actually atheistic religions. They do not, and in a very strange way, Hinduism allows for this. So if we study Hindu philosophy actually includes the study of Buddhism and Jainism as atheistic, quote unquote, faiths or religions. They will even say that. So that's interesting. However, the way that it evolves and is being practiced today, it seems like, if you walk into a Buddhist temple, do you have Buddhist temples in LA?
Yes.
You do, right? You do, right? Yeah. I'm sure the big ones are probably in San Francisco. I think in San Francisco, because the biggest Chinatown outside of in the world is actually in San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so you will see statues, people praying to statues, right? Or idols, right, as we would say. Or if you walked into a Jain temple, you would see them actually like venerating idols and images. So that is a later development. And again, it's interesting and strange because it seems like then, one would go and pray at a Hindu temple to a Hindu god. They could go and pray at a Jain temple to a Jain god, or go to a Buddhist temple and actually worship the Buddha. So that's how they can look similar, but they are also quite different. So,
And what is the dominant religion in Malaysia?
Malaysia is Islam.
Okay.
About 70% of the population is Muslim. Interesting history in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia had two big influences coming here prior to the arrival of Islam, and it was both Hinduism and Buddhism. So the most ancient civilizations in Southeast Asia were like a mixture of Hinduism and Buddhism. So, which is very interesting. So even until today, so if you go to Thailand, you'll see them, that it's very Buddhist, but there's also a lot of Hindu influence there.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of the temples and Bangkok.
Okay.
Because I was in Bangkok for 2 weeks for a photo shoot, and
wow.
Yeah, we went to the temples, and it was very ornate, and but it was before this was before I was a Christian, so
of course
I had no context for I should have avoided. So
yeah.
And then did you mention Confucianism?
Yes, that's China.
Okay.
So in China, so that's India. So that's India, and then China is basically Taoism and Confucianism, right? So Taoism, we don't really know what the origins are. We believe they come from tribal religions, like in every other part of the world, right? If you go back and look at ancient civilizations, every part of the world has tribal religions, or what we would say indigenous religions, right? So that is where they come from. And then it evolves into something more sophisticated with like higher gods and lower gods and all those things. Same thing with Hinduism, by the way, right? Hinduism is not one chunk, right? It's many, many, many religions. And again, it sort of originates with big gods and quote unquote small gods. So there are like tribal gods coming. So this is common in many parts of the world. But so let's go to Confucianism. So Confucianism is clearly polytheistic, like Hinduism. Clearly, right? And then Confucianism is interesting because Confucianism, we have a founder. We know who founded today the debate is it a religion or is it a philosophy? It's both. Starts out as basically Confucius wanting to reform society on the basis of a very structured kind of like, okay, if we obey these rules, then society will be harmonious, everybody will be happy. And
they're almost like proverbs. They're almost like proverbs. Confucius.
Yes. But also he has a very clear structure of who's at the top. So the ruler is at the top. So it's very, of course, obviously monarchical, right? It was empires and kings. That was the, system of government, religion. Everything was intermingled during those days, right? So obey the king. Every subject obeys the king. Life will be perfect. Then you have the head of the family, the male head of the family.
Right.
By the way, women are out of the picture.
Completely.
Whether,
Okay.
Yeah, so very strict, very authoritarian. So that's Confucianism. Now, how does Confucianism and Taoism sort of merge, right? And then later on, we also have Buddhism coming into China via India.
Okay.
Overland, Silk Road comes into China. We'll talk about that later. How do these religions kind of like get together, right? Get married, right? So to speak, right? So part of what Confucius says makes a harmonious and happy society. Oh, also not just harmonious and happy, virtuous. He keeps saying virtuous, like what we would say righteousness.
Right.
So it's not just Christianity that's concerned with righteousness. Many other religions also want like human beings to behave in a righteous way, right? So that's interesting, right? So anyway, right. So he says that you must perform rituals to the gods. So which gods is he talking about? So it's the Taoist gods. So then it's easy. It kind of like merges and mingles very easily. So these two then, bam, come together.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, post Confucius. So Confucius was, again, during his lifetime, not very well known. So he's just a minor person. He taught, he tried to work for the government. Like, it was not a very happy life. But after that, he's venerated, and he's even venerated to the status of a god.
Wow.
So yeah.
So people pray
Yeah.
to Confucius?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
And there were temples. I don't know if there still are temples, but there were temples to Confucius, and people would perform rituals to like Confucius. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. If I'm not mistaken, there are still some temples left in China, certain parts of China, but I'm not sure if they're active or anything like that. Yeah. So in China, they prayed to Confucius. Again, I need to check whether in Taiwan they still do that. I'm not so sure. Yeah, but other parts of the world, you don't really get temples to Confucius because, you know, when it again, it comes to the West, it's studied more as from its secular contributions to society rather than it's a religion that needs to be studied. So anyway, so that's India and China for you. So how does Buddhism then mingle into Chinese religions? And today it's almost like exclusively people think it's a Chinese religion.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism is not associated with India at all, right? Right?
Right.
Yeah. So that is a different story. We don't have time to get into it. Why did it disappear from India? So anyway, so again, Buddhism comes into China. Again, so Confucianism is something that will like, okay, come, we'll welcome you, right? So the Buddha ends up being kind of like adopted into the Taoist pantheon of gods easily, very easily.
Okay.
So he's just like another, you know, kind of like God who needs to be worshipped. So today, if you go to a Buddhist temple, like I said, you'll see Taoist gods, you'll see the Buddha. So that is the way it is being practiced. East Asia, primarily East Asia.
Okay. Wow.
South Asia is a different story. So in South Asia, Buddhism is nearly entirely out of India. Almost like maybe 0.1%. One part of India where he's supposed to be the birthplace of the Buddha, and then in Sri Lanka. But very different. Those two strands, or we can say denominations, are very different from each other.
Apparently, and then recently there were, I think there were Sikhs that were murdered in Canada, and they blamed Modi. They blamed India on this.
Yeah.
What was that about? Why is there this antipathy between Modi and Sikhism?
Yeah, so that is a political issue rather than a religious issue. It has nothing to do with religion.
Okay.
So Sikhism now, Sikhism basically comes about in the 19th century. So it's a very new religion. If you look at all, you know, the religions, this is very new. Yeah. So Sikhism, north of India, again, out of Hinduism in a way that, so by that time, we already have Christianity and Islam kind of like settled in India on top of Hinduism, right? And so Sikhism is basically saying, it's also interesting, they are monotheistic. They believe in one God. This God doesn't have a name. His name is just name, Nam, they'll say that's his name. But anyway, so they are basically saying, you know, we don't really need Hinduism. We don't need the other religions. Let's just focus on this one God. Very simple religion. Very much about charity and
virtue.
You know, doing good work. Virtue, yes, but charity. They are an extremely generous group of people, Becket, I tell you.
Yeah, well, in the 90s, when I moved to LA, I don't see them around so much anymore, but I remember in the 90s, Sikhs were, especially in Beverly Hills, Sikhs were always around. And it was so funny because they were in their white, whatever that outfit's called with the turbans.
Yes.
And what was really funny about it is they always drove old Mercedes-Benz wagons. I don't know why that is the connection there, but
I don't know.
But yeah, so there were Sikhs in there were a lot of Sikhs in Los Angeles back in the day. I don't really see them around so much anymore, but yeah.
I'll tell you where they've gone.
Where did they go?
They went to Vancouver.
They did?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kidding, but there's a huge like Sikh community in Vancouver.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that murder was in Vancouver. That guy was killed in Vancouver.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, it's a okay political issue. It's about the Sikh community. So the Sikh community is basically, many of them or most of them come from this ethnic community in the northeast of India called the Punjabis, right? And they have been, so there is a strand of Sikhism that is basically asking for their own homeland. Again, complicated story, Indian independence. I don't know if you've heard of the partition. The partition is basically what split the Indian subcontinent into Pakistan and India.
Yes.
Right. And then it was horrific. It was horrific. So the Sikhs basically got caught in between because part of Punjab was in Pakistan, part of Punjab was in India.
It's kind of like East and West Berlin almost.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah. And so they were basically
because in Pakistan, it's a mostly Muslim country, whereas India is mostly Hindu, right?
Yeah. So the brilliant strategy of like, let's send all the Muslims to Pakistan and let's send all the, Hindus in Pakistan to India. I'm like, no, man, let's not get into that. Yeah. Anyway, like, fun fact, right? That map of India was drawn by someone who did not do a single geographical survey of India. Can you believe that? They just like basically like cut the line and said, okay, you go here, you go here. Terrible.
Yes.
Anyway, so they wanted their own homeland, right? And so that fight has been ongoing. And so that's basically what's happening. And so because like the Sikh diaspora in Canada is so strong, their lobby is very strong, right? And Modi can be tricky in terms of, what his ideology is and he wanting to create, like a Hindu nation. And he's basically not sympathetic. Of course, he's not going to be sympathetic to the Sikhs creating their own homeland. So in a nutshell, that's what's happening. Yeah, okay. He has not had, a good relationship with this community at all. Yeah.
Okay, now talk about these different religions, these worldviews. What are the similarities and differences in general about all of these different Eastern religions that we just spoke about?
Yeah, so I think I sort of touched on the differences, right?
Yeah.
But the similarities are, and this is true for every religion, including the Judeo-Christian religions. There is basically no separation between the secular and the sacred. So whatever they are teaching, whatever doctrines or tenets of the faith are basically for all of life. So it's not like, going to the temple, praying, and then you leave it behind. And then, you perform certain rituals or you chant certain mantras or whatever it is, and that's it. And then the rest of life can be separated from that. So that is the main similarity with all religions, right? And then, maybe we can talk a little bit about secularism. Secularism is a concept that comes from the West. Eastern religions or religion on the whole does not allow for secularism. So secularism comes out of Europe.
Right.
During the Enlightenment, our favorite time period in history.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So the French basically, came up with a very beautiful systematic explanation of atheism for the first time in history, like formulating a philosophy of atheism. So secularism is this like kind of like, okay, hang on, how can we now like apply atheism to life, right? So it's saying you separate religion from life.
And that's why the French Revolution was such a disaster, because it was based on it was without God, and they turned Catholic Roman Catholic churches, cathedrals like Notre Dame into temples of reason.
Yes.
And it was such a disaster. And then there was the Reign of Terror. But the founding of the US was based on biblical principles, which is why it was it's lasted at least this far, far.
Yes.
So
yes.
So
very true.
Yeah, there's a very stark difference between 1789 and 1776. Very big.
Absolutely right. And so we have kind of like, I mean, maybe not at that time, but now people who maybe are atheist, but mostly claim to be secular, trying to somehow say, we can have a little bit of religion in our lives without really following the religion, right? So today, right, Becket, it's like the buzzword out there is, I'm a cultural Christian.
Right.
right? Yeah, you have all like Richard Dawkins and
Yes.
many people claiming, oh, we need cultural Christianity, but Christianity doesn't allow for that, right?
Right. I think, yeah, maybe even Jordan Peterson's a cultural Christian. I'm
Yes,
not sure
yes,
quite.
yes.
I'm not sure
Yeah,
where he is right now, but
I
anyway,
know. Yeah. I think Jordan Peterson is slightly a bit more vocal and more, I don't know, maybe he believes. I think he believes, but
well,
anyway,
he was
right.
on a what was he on recently? He was on a podcast and
Mm.
he was on a podcast with Richard Dawkins and
Yes, that's
Alex
right. Yeah.
O'Connor, and they're both the new atheists. But I don't think they call themselves that anymore. But they put him on the spot and they said, do you believe in the virgin birth? And do you believe in the resurrection? And he kept trying to get out
Dodging.
of it and squirm his way out of it. And then finally they said, okay, let's just pretend we're at a dinner party. Alex said this to him. He said, do you believe in the virgin birth? And he said, no. And so it's like, okay, you just, you finally came out, which is, which I mean, not to get off on a tangent, but
no.
I just, with Jordan Peterson, because I actually went to an event of his in Los Angeles where he was teaching Exodus. It's like, if you don't believe in the veracity of the scriptures, you shouldn't really be teaching the Bible like that. So I think he needs to kind of stop that, stop trying to do that. Because even
and
at this, even
he did
at
an
this
entire
event,
series on Exodus, Becket. I don't know if you've watched that. With that, roundtable discussion, Os Guinness was there, many people who were there, some atheists, some believers, some, which I watched a little bit. I think I watched the first 2 episodes, like 5 or 6 episodes, and then I'm like, I'm not so sure where this is going. Yeah,
I know. My friends that I went with to his talk at the YouTube theater down in Los Angeles, he was just, when he was talking about Exodus, he was just, I mean, it was like this crazy, none of it made sense. And so we actually, in the middle of it was a packed theater too. It was a ton of people.
I bet. Yeah.
But in the middle of it, we just got up and left because it was like, wow, but this is a crazy explanation of what Exodus is.
Yes. So anyway, you didn't go off on a tangent. That's really important because that is sort of what people think we can do with these religions.
Right.
Or we can do with any religion. Right. And so no, that they don't allow for that, right? Because, like what I will say is every religion has its own internal logic, right? You have to understand it. You have to kind of study it from the inside out, so to speak. So we can't approach the religions and impose a secular worldview on it prior to studying the religions. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Right. So we have to understand it internally, right? And when you study any of these religions internally, there is no room for secular and sacred. So that is the similarity between not just Eastern religions, but any religion. So those who studied religions will know this. Yeah.
And then, so how did these religions come to the West?
Yeah,
I know that's a big question, but
yeah. So it's really interesting. That is sort of like my baby. I love studying about these things and like especially ancient civilization. So we can basically divide the world into pre-colonial times and post-colonial times, right? So from ancient days, right? So if we look at the earliest civilizations, even before we look at India and China and Egypt, which are the big ones, right? And Mesopotamia, right? You go back to tribal religions or indigenous religions, right? They have always exchanged. So no one lived in a silo, right? There was always an exchange. There was always an intermingling of cultures, religions. It was really, I like that. I wish we had that. It was like a, open exchange, and people were not really so paranoid about, the other, right? But anyway, right? So there were, but the thing that to note is, the first kind of religion to really focus on, quote unquote, missionary movements was Buddhism. Isn't that interesting? Right. So out of it, this is how it gets to China. So one of the emperors in the north of India converts to Buddhism, and his entire empire becomes Buddhist. This is the Emperor Ashoka. And his empire is called the Mauryan Empire. Very interesting. And so he actually sends his son as a missionary. So this monk travels to China and he takes the religion to China. So that is how it sort of gets, assimilated into the Chinese religion. So that, and also how it gets to Southeast Asia. So it was trade and religion at the same time. So the Silk Road is on land, but there's also something called the maritime Silk Route, which takes the sea route, which scholars have been talking about like in the last 10, 15 years. Nobody was really talking about that because it's really interesting. Let me just tell you this. Have you been to Cambodia, Becket?
No.
No. Okay. So in Cambodia, there is this huge temple complex known as Angkor Wat. Huge, right? When people go and visit that, they see it is basically a mishmash of Hinduism and Buddhism, and you find that all over Southeast Asia. It mixed. Hinduism and Buddhism was mixing. Now, the architecture of that temple is identical to the architecture of one of the biggest temples in the south of Asia, in South India. How did that happen? You tell me how that happened. So there was this king, this empire in the south of India that was spreading, and this is like the stones.
Does it look like the Taj Mahal or something?
No. Taj Mahal is Muslim, Becket.
Okay. Sorry. I'm getting confused now. Okay, go ahead.
No. Taj Mahal is the Mughal Empire, north of India. Yeah. So anyway, this is like and like it's just how did they do this? So anyway, so I mean, we can sort of see that there's also an active kind of like attempt, I won't say a missionary movement, to propagate the religion. Right. And sometimes they clashed, sometimes they got along, right? So this is nothing new, right? So that's ancient civilization. They've mixed, they've mingled. Now colonialism comes along, Christianity comes along. This is I would say the sad side of Christianity, which is like there is forced, how do I say this? Imposition, a conversion or imposition of that culture, and and we get into trouble. Christians get into trouble, right, for doing this, right? So they come, and then some parts of the world it's forced, some parts of the world it's they're doing it. It comes alongside like genuine efforts to transform society or reform society. So missionaries are the ones who are basically building schools and hospitals and all those things, right? So again, it's not entirely accurate to see colonialism and missions as going together, because you'll always see guns, gods, gold, right? I'm sure you've heard that term before, right? They didn't go together. Like when this Spanish came to America, they said it was guns, God, gold. Right. So it didn't. In fact, whether it's Catholicism or whether it's the Protestants, the colonial powers hated the missionaries because they were like interfering with their plans to like dominate the local population, right? Because the missionaries are coming and giving them education, allowing them to go to Europe to get an education, right? So so you basically see kind of like during the colonial time period, sort of like Western religions coming into the East. Now, here's what's very interesting. We get a very one-sided picture of this. Colonialism is all negative, right? And you also get CRT coming out of it, all this wonderful new, ways of looking at culture. History is not black and white. So we also have a Western fascination with the East. Right. Because again, let's remember that the Enlightenment basically said we don't need Christianity. Right. And the West was never exposed to Eastern religions unless you traveled out, right? They didn't know about Eastern religions. America is a completely different story. You guys are isolated, right? You are new, very new, a very new nation. So it's in America, it's solely through immigration that the Eastern religions are coming into America. Right. But anyway, so whether it's through colonialism, whether it's through immigration, both usually at the same time, when the Westerners come into contact with these Eastern religions, they are like, oh, wow, you know what? We've been looking at these cultures the wrong way, right? They are actually superior to Christianity. They are actually amazing, right? Because, obviously the Enlightenment was a reaction against the church. Right? Roman Catholic, and then later even the Protestant church, even the Anglican church. Your nation was founded by Puritans running away from the Church of England, right? Yes. Right, but anyway, right? So you have this large group of people actually kind of like being very interested in Eastern culture and saying, hang on a minute, we need to follow these religions because these religions came before Christianity and therefore they are purer, right? They are not polluted by Christianity.
Right.
So that is one way that the West actually looked at the East,
And
right?
it's like,
and so we
in recent history, I mean, you think of the Beatles, they had that, they went to India and it was like a whole thing. They come back. So that had a huge impact on the West, on England and America. That was a huge deal.
Yeah. But that is later. This is
I know.
This is 18th. In India, it's actually 17th century. So starting 17th century, so 17th century onwards, this has been happening. This has been happening, right? And so we also have this very serious academic and scholarly study of like Eastern religions. And then you have very specialized fields of study emerging. So if you study, China, you're called a sinologist. If you study Egypt, you're called an Egyptologist, right? If you study India, you're called an Indologist, right? Assyriologist, if you study Mesopotamia. So you have all these, which are still being, studied today. So we owe that to colonialism, like seriously.
Yeah.
So another thing that was happening is the Western scholars were basically, and actually these were like colonial like officials, right? People working for the government, translating Eastern religious texts into English, right? Imagine what kind of an impact that is going to have on the West.
Right.
Yeah. So anybody can read these texts. So we have people adopting these religions, claiming to be a Buddhist, claiming to be, it's very interesting for me. Again, I love this part of Indian history, which is like, the British coming into India and basically adopting Indian lifestyles, right? So they become Hindus, they'll dress, with Indian clothes and marry Indian women. And, that is really, China was a bit resistant. Japan and China is a different story because they weren't open. They actually tried to like block, the Western powers from coming into China and Japan. So, which is why, again, when you look at China, right, they are not very open to Western influence even until today, and they get into trouble for that, right? Yeah.
I mean, the Christian church is, I don't know how does the government in China now view the Christian church? I know a lot of it is underground, but then there's kind of an official Christian church that is allowed.
Yeah. So China, again, tries to do two things at the same time, which is claim to be open and free because they do want capitalism. They do want, the West to come and invest in the country, so they can't be seen to be too closed, right? So they will say, oh, we have freedom of religion in this country. So it's like very two-faced, right? On the one hand, you're saying this, but on the other hand, when you look at the practice, that's not what's happening. So it's a prescribed Christianity, right? So they will try and send a government official to come and say, imagine you have like, someone from the State Department coming and sitting at your service and kind of monitoring what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what's happening. Yeah. So it's not just the Christians, it's also the Muslims horribly being persecuted in China. And I'm sure you know about Tibet, right? And Buddhism there, and So anyway, China is tricky. Japan, again, the country, you were in Japan, Becket, you know this.
Shinto is their
Shinto and Buddhism, but their Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, which is very different.
But what's the difference between Shintoism and Buddhism?
Shinto is a native indigenous Japanese religion, originated in Japan. Again, rather simplistic. They believe it's nature worship. So they believe that it's animistic, right? So the mountain, so like Mount Fuji, right? They believe is a spirit, right? So have you been to Mount Fuji?
Yeah. But it's interesting that Shintoism never really came to the West.
It didn't, because it is not meant to be practiced outside of Japan.
Okay, I get it.
So like when we look at indigenous religions, right? Even when you look at Native American religions, right? It's very place bound, right? So it's very like bound by the geographical location. You're not meant to practice it outside, So for example, the Lakota, right? Their sacred place is the Black Hills, South Dakota, right? I think so. Black Hills?
I think so. I don't know.
Wyoming or South, I can't remember. Anyway, they're not meant to practice that religion outside of that location.
Right.
Right. So again, I mean, it's interesting when you look at your Trail of Tears, Andrew Jackson, right? Displacing all those tribes. Oh my goodness. Beyond like the human kind of like lives that were lost, they were basically being stopped from practicing their religion. When you
Right.
move them, right? When you move them, they were moved west, right? So like today they are mostly settled in like Oklahoma and I think Kansas and the Midwest, right? You can't move these people and tell them, okay, go practice your religion somewhere else. No. So you're destroying the religion, right? So anyway, that's the story with Shinto. Same story with Shinto.
Right.
Not meant to be practiced outside of Japan. But I've actually visited a Shinto temple in Vancouver.
Right. In Vancouver. Okay.
Yes.
So, but, and obviously, pop culture, social media, I mean, that has had a big influence. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, I think it was in the 90s when, oh gosh, what's the actress's name? She was in Eat, Pray, Love,
Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts.
Right? Yeah.
Like there was this whole kind of movement in the 90s. I remember it just how, going to India was going to somehow save you and like enlighten you, and you're going to have like the singer, I can't think of her name now either, Alanis Morissette, she wrote a song called Thank You India, basically, and it was all about how she went to, after she sold 25 million albums, she was so kind of overwhelmed by the fame and like the money and all, so she went to India for a year, I think, and somehow like everything just resolved itself when she came back. She was like at peace.
Oh wow. I did not know that. Okay, that's interesting.
So 90s. How did it, I'm sorry,
90s, Alanis Morissette. Really?
It was I believe it was the 90s.
Okay.
I remember listening to that song all the time. Thank You India. And it was like, somehow if you go to India, you're going to be spiritually awakened, and like it's going to heal everything in your life.
Yeah. So were you tempted to go and try that?
No, not at all. I wasn't interested, but I like the idea maybe. But okay, so then how did it creep into pop culture? I mean, as we just said, Eat, Pray, Love, but like before that, how did it start to creep into pop culture? These Eastern.
So as always, let's blame Hollywood.
Yes. Exactly.
So it is Hollywood. It is Western, cinema particularly. And I think the huge turning point in American history, and I'll blame the Americans for this, good way, bad way, take it however you want to take it, right? Pearl Harbor, right? You get dragged into World War II.
Right.
And prior to that, America already has a love-hate relationship with immigration from the East, right? So at first it was open doors and then closed doors, right? World War II changed everything. So I'm sure you know this, Becket, you remember this. All throughout World War II, it was very, very anti-Eastern, right? So, you had what were they called?
Internment camps, right? The Japanese internment camps.
Right. However, what changed the way, especially Americans, looked at Japan and the East was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right? Oh my goodness, what a tragedy, right? I honestly don't care whether you support that, that America should have done this or not. That's not the point. The point is that kind of devastating loss of life in modern human history, no one has seen that kind of devastation before. Right. So you also have the tide turning against Western ideology, not really helping us with understanding the East. So it's racism and you don't understand their culture. Huge turning point. So what also happens, if I'm not mistaken, is soon after that, so I think in the 50s, you do get movies kind of like, I think you had quite a few movies that actually, would be set in Japan or China or,
right.
It's interesting, right? And kind of like showing American audiences, like, look at this, they're actually nice people, right? So they were not actually portrayed in a negative way. So movies especially, right? And I think, that was after that, the 50s were when a lot of movies were coming out, right? In out of Hollywood. I think, wasn't that like the golden age of Hollywood or something like that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, the 40s. Yeah.
Yes, 50s, 40s, 50s, right? And then television, right? You have television, and then that was 150s. 60s, you have what do you call it? Flower power. What was that movement?
Yeah, the
Hippie.
the hippie movement.
Hippie movement, right?
Yeah.
East. It was Eastern.
Yeah.
So that then brings even more of the East into the US, right?
And what was
So,
with the hippie movement? What was the main focus? What religion was the focus of that hippie movement? Was it? It was everything.
It was everything. Hinduism, East.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything East.
So basically, anything East was good, and anything West was terrible. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Christians were terrible. Okay.
Terrible. Yeah. So so that again, and then you also have it coming into not just cinema but also music, and that's where the Beatles come in, and then TV shows, everything. It just like an explosion, right, in the 60s, right? And then that's it. It comes in to Western culture through pop culture.
Yeah.
Right.
And now it's very prevalent now.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like over, it's portraying these cultures in an overtly positive way. Not really telling audiences like, hang on a minute, they also had their bad side, right?
Yeah.
They did, right? So for example, let's go back to China and Japan, right? China and Japan basically saw any outsider as a barbarian, right? So it wasn't just the Greeks who saw outsiders as barbarians, right? It's the Chinese and the Japanese. And it's very interesting. China and Japan had categories of barbarians. So they'll say inner barbarian and outer barbarian. I love this. So interesting, right? For China, Japan, and Korea were inner barbarians. So you're slightly better because you're Eastern, right? Westerners, outside of that, outer barbarian. Very bad. Out, get out. Yeah. So it's so interesting.
Yeah.
But I'll always say this, like, there's no such thing as an innocent civilization, right? We human beings have always been experts at treating each other very badly, right? So for all these people, who look at like CRT and, it's so one-sided, I'm like, go look at these cultures and civilizations, right? They've had a bad history.
Exactly.
Right? Including the Native Americans, like, excuse me.
Yes. Yes, they were sacrificing babies to gods, all kinds of things.
Yes. Yeah.
And so obviously part of the output of this in the US and the West is yoga, mindfulness, transcendental meditation, and martial arts.
Yeah.
So because I've done an episode on yoga before, and let's talk about yoga for a second. I've done an episode on it before, and I think it shocked a lot of people.
Yes.
Because I just, in LA, every young girl or young woman has like a yoga mat under her arm, and she's going with her Lululemon, outfit on. She's going to her yoga class, and I'm just like, you're going to worship demons now. Congratulations. So let's talk about that. Like, tell me about yoga and the caste system and in India, and how, just talk about yoga a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, you did a fantastic job with the yoga, right, with your guest. That was wonderful. But however, you didn't have time, obviously. So the one thing that we need to understand about yoga is, apart from it being, just a ritual of Hinduism, it's also very entrenched in the caste system, right? So basically, like the caste system, there are 4 castes, and the top 3 are the ones who can practice yoga according to the scriptures.
But the Brahmin caste is the highest.
Brahmin is at the top. So they are the priestly caste, and they monopolize the scriptures for the longest time, because they are the only ones who they were the only ones. Now it's a bit different. It's a bit different, but still, the caste system is still very much part of life. For many Hindus, not all of them. But anyway, so that they monopolize. So basically, if you wanted to learn yoga or you wanted to practice yoga, you need to go and study with a Brahmin.
Right.
Because they could read. right?
Right.
So then the next class that comes after that, caste, sorry, that comes after that are the Kshatriyas. So they are the ruling class, the kings, the emperors, right? They could access the scriptures to a certain extent, because again, it's a very interesting relationship, between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. And the Brahmins were actually like advisors and like, would serve even in the courts, right? In many of the courts of the kings and emperors, right? Anyway, so those two, pretty much not much restriction when it comes to accessing the scriptures. So they could practice yoga, and they would. Third caste are known as the Vaishyas. So these guys are like the upper middle class, right? I keep saying caste, right? And so they were traders, merchants. So basically,
Right.
people who are like skilled workers, right? They could appeal to the Brahmins to go and study the scriptures. They would pay them, right? So, but they had the means to do that. So these guys, no problem. The next caste are the Shudras. So the Shudras are basically unskilled, like so chefs, agriculture, whatever, right? Unskilled workers, right? You did not have access to the scriptures.
Is that the
No,
untouchables? Are those the
no,
untouchables?
no,
Okay.
Becket. The untouchables are outside of the caste system.
Okay.
Right? Outcast. So the term, the not so popular term, is actually outcast.
Okay.
Not part of the caste system. I mean, if you are interested, I'll send you the scripture reading. You read and see how they are being, it's a translation, obviously, of how they are meant to be treated. But anyway, let's not go into that. But right,
Yeah.
so by, when you say untouchable, you are not even supposed to touch them.
Right.
Let alone, how are they supposed to read the scriptures? And they're not even considered Hindus. They're not.
Yeah.
Right? Now, why should we, especially Christians, want to do this when it is oppressing such a large group of people? So that is my question. What business do we have, right? Apart from, on top of, it is a Hindu ritual. Why?
Yeah, in Christianity, God is not no respecter of persons. So it's like it's equal opportunity for anyone basically to become a Christian. And so this is the opposite of that. And a whole kind of underclass or outcast cannot even they can't even have access to the scriptures, the Hindu scriptures.
Yeah. So I mean that's for me, it's very sad. I still it bothers me a lot, like when I look at this, and especially with like Christians. It's just a form of exercise. I mean, we can talk about this later. It's like, what shall we talk about? What is the approach of like Christians? What do we do with all these like practices? So okay, there are two ways to look at this, right? One is from an evangelistic point of view, right? What do we do? I will always say you need to, like I said, you need to understand the religions internally from their point of view.
Right.
I think in the past, and when I first was introduced to like the study of world religions from a Christian point of view, it was a very defensive stance that most of the classes took, right? So it's like you learn so that you can attack. There's room for that. There's room for apologetics. I'm not disparaging apologetics at all. But that is not the starting point. That should not be the starting point, right? You don't look at, someone who's a Hindu or someone who's, whatever, right, religion, and think, oh, how am I supposed to convert that person? No. Like, don't do that, right? Just go and read up about the religion. Again, don't read it from, don't read stuff that's written by Christians. Read about them from people who practice that religion.
Okay.
First, right? And then look at it from the Christian point of view, right? So we must do that. We must develop what is called cultural intelligence. We must, because it's not how. So the main criticism against Christians is forced conversions. And Christians have been guilty of demonizing these religions. Not helpful.
Right.
Not helpful, right? And you see this playing out in a very extreme way. So you see extremism in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in many parts of the world, right? Because they've been treated badly by Christians.
Yes.
So let's understand that, right? Let's not say that, they are wrong or whatever. So we have to, right? And then once you've done that, then it's also conversations, right? Asking them, hey, how do you practice this religion? Can I understand what you're doing? Can I try and see what you're doing? So one of the things that I like doing, which I don't do much these days, is go attend a wedding, like a Hindu wedding or a Sikh wedding. Just go and see, just go and see what, I remember one time, someone was actually sitting next to me and explaining what's going on. So that it's a lot of fun actually, to observe, right? So I'm not saying participate, but actually just go and see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. Visiting temples or praying or, no, I would say don't visit, but try not to participate in rituals. So again, that goes back to, what do we do with yoga? What do we do with traditional Chinese medicine or martial arts or whatever it is? Christians, not necessary for you to practice any of this. There is no biblical precedent for us to even touch these things.
Right.
I think God is very clear. God is very clear, right? But it gets tricky. It's the same thing with gender issues and identity issues and LGBTQ issues. If it's your family member, it's a different thing. And with non-Christian religions, it's even more sensitive because we have many people who are the sole Christian in their family, right? The entire family is Hindu or the entire family is Buddhist. And do you want to antagonize them? So it's sort of like the same thing, should I attend my son's, gay wedding of my son, right? I mean, that one you have to navigate. But I do have friends. So one of the things is, food offered to idols. So this is something that is very common during festivals. So if they have festivals, they have for Chinese New Year, they have reunion dinners, right? So you'd have to go to your parents' house and eat together with them, right? And or for a Hindu festival, so next week it's Diwali, next Thursday, Wednesday is Diwali, right? So many Christians will be celebrating with their families, and when you are there and then you say, ooh, I'm not gonna eat this, right? It's I don't know, Becket. I don't have advice for that. That is between that person and God, and I don't want to dictate. But when you can make the choice, and when it is not something that's going to show Christ in a very bad way, right? You see what you can do, right? So again, for me, I have Hindu friends, and they will, sometimes bring food that I know has been offered to idols, right? So I'll just tell them, no, it's okay. I'm not going to eat this, because my, I'm not allowed to eat this. And they're like, okay, okay, that's fine, right? So, but again, it's different with family, it's different with friends, so yeah.
Right.
But personally speaking, don't dabble, don't dabble with any kind of ritual or practice or, that non-Christian religion or practice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the last thing is how have these religions, Eastern religions, even though how have they influenced the Christian church?
Wow.
I know that's a big question too, but
yeah. People think so it can stem out of a misunderstanding of what we call general revelation when we study theology, right? So there's special revelation and general revelation, right? So special revelation is a God through his son, through scripture, revealing the truth to us regarding salvation, right? But now general revelation is God revealing himself through nature. Right. That when he says he's put it in their hearts, right? That they know.
And Paul, that's why Paul says you have no excuse, because we can, Yeah.
So it's nature, but also within yourself, ethics and morals, kind of within yourself. We know instinctively that you don't kill another human being. We know it's wrong. Yeah. Right now, because of the way that these religions have had a history of mixing and mingling and assimilating in the East, they think that we can adopt the quote unquote cultural aspects of these religions into the church. Right. So I have seen not personally, not in person, but I've seen, and this was like, I think maybe last year or a couple of years ago, like there's this huge kind of like, everybody was talking about this. It's like in a church, in a couple of churches, they were doing or performing Taoist rituals in the church. So it was like all across social media. And I've seen pictures of these things happening in the States as well, Becket. Like, so it has happened in Vancouver. I know of a church, a very, very close friend of mine attending that church. They did this in the church. Why? Because it's cultural. It's cultural.
Right.
So again, what is culture? Right. So it's not the same as the clothes or the food or the music. This is directly related to the religion. Right. It's not a cultural thing. So there is a confusion about what culture is because they don't understand what scripture teaches, or they don't understand. I mean, the entire Old Testament is about stay away, right? Stay away, right, from pagan culture. Stay away from, all the cultures that were created by man, right? And we know what happened to Israel. We know what happened to God's people when they disobeyed God, right? The other thing is, I want like Christians to understand that there is always a supernatural element to this, right? When it is tied to the religion, right? You are opening the door for, the supernatural realm, right? To come into your life, right? Don't forget that, right? It's not harmless.
Exactly.
It might seem harmless.
That's why I did the episode on yoga. It may seem harmless, but you're inviting, spirits that are not of God into your life. So it's not good. Yeah.
It's not good. It's not good. Right. Even though you might not see the immediate consequences, it will come.
Yeah.
It will come. It is coming. Right. So didn't you say that you also you tried yoga and then you didn't like it or something?
Yeah, I tried it. In the 90s, I think I tried yoga, and I just hated it. I hated the poses and it was not something, praise God, it wasn't something that I was drawn to. So I only went twice.
Oh, okay. But was that out of curiosity, or did you think that it was
No, it was more of just kind of I wanted it was more of physical exercise kind of thing. It wasn't out of curiosity or religion. It wasn't like I was trying to find God or whatever. It was just I just wanted to be able to to stretch and to be limber. But
right.
But praise God, I didn't get involved in that.
So anyway, so that's what I will say about any Eastern religion or any non-Christian, anything outside of Christ, right?
Yes.
We don't need it, right? We don't need to even play around with this. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it there. Thank you, Sunita, for coming on the show. I appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge. And maybe we'll do a follow-up if we get some comments about, well, wait, what about this? What about that? But thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Becket. Thank you. And I feel like it's too much, but I hope it has helped people to understand, that this is, again, something that might seem very innocent. It's not obvious in our lives, but like everything else, Satan can creep in very subtly and slowly into our lives with this, right? And so for me, the main thing is just be aware, right, that this is out there. And it's also quite prevalent in culture, right? So just being aware. So happy to come, and we can explore the different religions. We can do India and China separately if you want. So that
okay. All right.
Maybe clarify things. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sunita. Have a good morning, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.